week's episode of Borderline Podcast Disorder. I hope you had a good start of the week. It's This episode. It's a very special one. Given the occasion, it's to basically, I guess, I wouldn't say celebrate, but highlight the um, suicide prevention day, and I think Suicide Awareness Month, which is September. And for that, I had a very special guest. Steve Phillip is basically the person who's behind the Jordan's Legacy Foundation, and that's to. I guess actually, you know what, you're gonna find out when we speak what that's about. If you're not familiar with Jordan's Legacy UK, and yeah, it was a very powerful episode to record. It was just so. I think it was very eye opening in a sense, and then it was also just brilliant chat, very open, very honest, and I, although it was a very heavy things that were discussed, it it felt good. It felt promising. For in regards to creating the said awareness, and helping out with those support platforms, not just for people who are struggling with their own experiences with I guess suicide thoughts and anything like that, but it's also about the way people deal with grief, and we've discussed basically how things felt for Steve himself, having his son, losing his son a few years ago, and also we've touched on some very other points. Probably the one that I'd say was the most impactful, at least for me, was I guess the ripple effect, that suicide has, and how it affects basically a lot more people than I guess you'd imagine, or you'd think, without looking at the numbers, and the stats and everything like that. So look, all through and through was a good conversation. It was really, again, eye opening. It was I would also say, again, it left me feeling hopeful for you know I want to say the future, in a very I guess maybe bizarre way, but yeah, it kind of did, because at least it looks like, because of people like Steven, because of people at Jordan's legacy, um, we can try and change, I guess, things for better. And besides of that, I'm back or I'm getting back slowly into going out and gigging more often. I got a couple of shows this week, and which is nice. I'm also going to start studying for a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, and it's going to start in a couple of weeks. So I'm excited about that. It's very exciting news, given the fact that I've been looking for, I guess, jobs that I like, during the day and things like that. That I would enjoy doing more for almost a year, and uh, it's not been as good as I wanted to. So I guess this is actually a very promising thing, and it actually makes me very excited, looking forward to it. And I'll keep you posted on how that goes, and I will also basically keep you posted on how gigging goes. I hope maybe at the end of the year, or maybe early next year, I will probably um, leave London as well for a couple of shows in UK, but I'm waiting to confirm the dates and everything else on that with some promoters or like gig organizers around outside of London. Sorry, not around, outside of London. Um, yeah, besides of that, I'm gonna let you enjoy the conversation with Steve, and yeah, I'll catch you before we wrap it up. So yeah, enjoy. Okay, hello, Steve. How's it going?
Yeah, good morning, Levi. Yes, really
Morning.
well. Thank you. Another busy week. We're getting up towards a busy month in my world at the moment. So yeah, keeping very busy.
So what's it? What does it? Just for anyone listening who's not aware, because I also, for context, we have a lot of listeners from United States. So I don't know whether it's an international, like whether the Suicide Awareness Month or Suicide Awareness Week it's same, but you're talking about September, right?
We are, yeah, absolutely. September the 10th, which is World Suicide Prevention Day. So it is a global thing. And I'll be connecting with many of those in my networks around the world, but particularly in the US. Yeah, we have a really good following and some fantastic connections over there.
And how now? Because how many years have you been involved for?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose for context, really, let's briefly explain the story. I had a pretty successful career in senior management in the automotive industry for years. Got involved in consultancy and was a director of a leadership and management training company. And then more recently, from around about 2009, I fell into the world of social media and became a consultant and set up my own consultancy practice, working with businesses, really showing them how to engage with LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. That used to surprise a lot of people because I think they expected some young, trendy millennial to turn up and at their business, and they got this old bloke with no hair. So that confused them. But for 11 and a half years, that's what I did. And then I was actually working with an organisation in the UK, in the Midlands near Birmingham, on December the 4th of 2019, and about to get in my car and drive back home when I got an incoming call. That call was from the girlfriend of my son, Jordan. And it was a call that just changed my life because in that moment, through huge distress and tears, she explained how she'd come home to Jordan's house just outside Leeds in Yorkshire and discovered he'd taken his own life. And at that moment, I went from the world of consultancy to the world of despair for some period of time. And it was later the following year, in fact, that the Jordan legacy that I founded was actually incorporated in the August. So really only kind of 8 or 9 months on. But the preparations for that had actually started a little bit earlier.
Of course. Oh wow. So this, and thank you for sharing the story. It's heartbreaking, but it sounds like the Jordan's legacy it's beautiful and it's setting up very strong foundations, and I think that's a wonderful thing to look at from a terrible situation.
I think a lot of people have done I've met so many people who've been bereaved in different ways through traumatic situations. Obviously, much of my connection has been with those in the world of suicide, who've been impacted by suicide. Many who have gone on to set up charities or organizations or causes or campaigns, others that want to do but haven't yet been able to find, in their own words, that inner strength to do it. But I think for me, it just gave me that sense of purpose that I needed at that time, really.
And I was just curious because before this happened, was like, were you aware of, or like, was Jordan talking about like his well-being, about like how he's feeling or anything like that? Was it like a known thing that he was struggling with his own thoughts, or did it come as a surprise?
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, the suicide came as a complete shock to everyone that knew Jordan. And you've kind of wrapped up a number of questions that I'll answer just there. So, Jordan was diagnosed with clinical anxiety and depression 4.5 years prior to his death in 2015. And it was the first time that I think he had maybe acknowledged and recognized, and we got to understand that some of the characteristics of Jordan, what you might describe as sometimes being withdrawn or not in a great mood or whatever, various traits that we would see as a family, finally had a label of some kind. And we really understood that Jordan was struggling with his mental health. Now, between that period and Jordan taking his life in 2019, you've got 4.5 years where he functioned extremely well as an adult. He was 34 when he took his own life. He had his own house. He had a lovely relationship with his girlfriend. He had a successful career in the UK working with the Independent Office for Police Conduct, the IOPC. He was an officer there, which looks into complaints against the police, of course, in the UK. We hear them very high profile whenever there's been something on the national news. And he had a huge network of friends, massive network. In fact, I got to learn this really after his death, that he had almost 4 separate networks of people some from his university days, some from where he'd lived and worked, some from where he used to live. And these groups actually, oddly, didn't interact with each other. They didn't know each other. But every one of them had a person who would consider themselves to be Jordan's best friend. So that was kind of really interesting. His friends described him as a very caring individual. He was the guy he was 6'1", 6'2" tall, good-looking guy. They talk about the sort of guy that walked into a room when a conversation was happening and would light up the room. Apparently, his dance moves at weddings were legendary.
Nice.
But he was very much someone for the underdog as well. He was someone that if his mates were out with him in Leeds or Newcastle or wherever on a Saturday night, they'd often look over their shoulders to see where Jordan was, and he'd be kneeling down chatting to a homeless person or a busker, and he might have had a few beers by then as well. But this was very much Jordan, the guy who, if any of his mates were struggling, he'd be the first to jump in a car and go down. But he had this high functioning life in many respects, great sense of humor, but also, as a family particularly, we got to see those moments where he was lower key. And of course, you don't get to see kind of your kids as they are when they grow up with the mates, of course. So, yeah, we were aware. One of the other questions you asked was, did Jordan talk about his mental health a lot? No, he really didn't. And I'm not aware. I think he talked closely with some very, very close friends that I've become aware of, conversations he may have had. I'm not aware that he ever discussed suicidal thoughts with anyone personally. He kept a lot of things like that very close to his chest.
That's really interesting to listen to, because I got diagnosed with something called borderline personality disorder, and it's like apparently it's one of those very common traits between people with borderline personality disorder, the suicidal ideations, and I personally have many times struggled with the idea, and it's just so interesting, and especially when you think about someone like you're saying, someone that's like you used a very very good phrase that people like in high what was the
I can't even remember what I said, but kind of high performing, not
high performing, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
But
I can't even remember what I said now. Yeah.
No, but that was very, very interesting to listen to, because I think I guess in some respects you'd think that or I guess one of the ways some people would see it is that there are loads of signs, it's always there maybe, but then when you see someone who's just like you said, who's there for other people, who's doing, all these things, but not even like there for himself. He's got like a good career. He's got, like you said, a home. He's got, a partner that, they care for, and then that's it. It's really mind blowing. And, I got almost not almost, but like the first time I've read about the story was on one of your posts, actually, on social media. It was the porridge spoon
Gosh, yes, that was what I
story.
shared just recently, wasn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, and do you wanna basically share on here
Yeah,
the
yeah,
idea of it, so everyone knows what we're
absolutely.
talking
And
about?
yeah, definitely. And I just remember the term we referred to, of course, was high functioning,
High
rather
functioning,
than high.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I know people have followed my story for the last 4.5 years, and what they know about me is I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve. I share, very personal details of what the experience was like. And some of that, I think, comes from my experience of social media and knowing what will work and what will create engagement. But yeah, the story that I shared recently, which had a huge response, was the day literally after Jordan's death. And just to go back slightly, as I say, I was some miles away on the day that it happened. I had to drive home that night. That was a 3 or 4 hour journey, and of course we came home to the family and some of the family driving over, and you can only imagine what that evening was like. The following day, we a few of us, Jordan's mum, his stepmom, and Jordan's sister and his girlfriend, and I, we got in the car and went over to Jordan's house. It's around about a 20-minute drive from where I live in Harrogate in North Yorkshire. And just kind of putting the key in the door, that moment. And as we walked in to visualize Jordan's house, it was you walk into a hallway and some stairs immediately on the right hand side, and down the hallway is this open newly developed kitchen and dining room. It really, the house was a project. There had been an old lady had lived in there, I think, since it was first built in the 50s, and he was gradually working through it. So as we walked into the hallway, and without going into detail, past the spot where Jordan had taken his own life, we walked into the kitchen, and it was kind of like a little bit of a time capsule, I suppose, as we looked on the large wooden kitchen table there with the benches either side. There was a shopping list on there, a few things Jordan had intended to buy, a reminder to contact the dentist. And there was this bowl of half-eaten porridge oats and a half-drunk glass of water, and the spoon, of course, in the porridge. And you stand there and you survey this last breakfast, and kind of thoughts go through your mind. And I wrote about this in the post, that is this what you do? Is this what you do before you end your own life? You sit down and have something to eat. I think for many people listening, you kind of go, why would you do that? But I think this is to not fully appreciate what's happening in the mind of someone who is suicidal. And we've heard this so many times, Levi, from people that we've interviewed that have attempted suicide. And this might relate, to your own experiences, is that in almost all cases, it's not that people want to die. That isn't what this is about. And people are going, well, surely it is. No. It's just that people cannot continue living with either the mental or physical pain that they're experiencing. And that is really a subtle difference. So right up until that last moment, while Jordan is having breakfast and writing a shopping list, there's kind of hope there, isn't there? There's hope that I will finish that bowl of porridge and I will go and get that shopping later in the day. But then, as I've heard so many times, the overwhelming drive to rid yourself of what you're going through takes over. And in that case, sadly, a little later that day, Jordan did take his own life. And the spoon, the reference to it is that I emptied the bowl of porridge and we washed the bowl. But I kept the spoon, and on that spoon was still just one little flake of porridge oats. And I have a memory box here at home, and that spoon sits there. And of course, I shared a photograph of the spoon on that post on LinkedIn if anyone is wanting to see that. So it was a real symbol, I suppose, of that moment, and something that really resonated with a lot of people, I think.
That it's so interesting to hear, about the suicide not being the will to die. It's just I guess, the giving into this, which I think at times, no times, but I feel like, again, from personal experiences, yeah, it's such a true or like correct line to say that, it's just the pressure that, like, the living with everything that's happening around, you're just like, oh, what is this? And then, like you said, to even put it in this retrospective of, halfway through a meal, or like, you're still continuing doing your things, you still continue doing your and I remember a couple of years ago when no couple, actually it was more than a couple, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, I was saving up money to send to my mom, because I knew that in case when I were to like be found, I wanted to make sure that she's got the money to be able to, get and it's stuff like this where, but then yeah, it's really wild to imagine when you're not a part of it, on how, or like what's been going on through someone's mind, because especially when you were saying about, living in a house that's a project, you think that you have all these little things that put together make you want to, get on with the next thing, you want to, yeah, finish your porridge and, go and do the shopping, and then in a couple of weeks you're doing some other bits in the house and whatnot, and then all of a sudden, it's not there anymore, the person that, had all these things going on. And sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say I totally agree with you. But interestingly, we talk about things to look forward to and the house as a project. But interestingly, it was quite an overwhelming project for Jordan, particularly with his anxiety and things he was struggling with. So we know that actually, in many respects, although he was looking forward to the end of this project, what it would look like, just the whole process and living in kind of floorboards in other parts of the house and so much work that needed doing. We do know that added to his anxiety as well, and just the act of living sometimes can be hard, as we know, for anyone. But if you're living with clinical depression and anxiety as well, it just magnifies so many times.
Did you, when he got diagnosed, when he first got diagnosed, did you know about that? As in, like, did he tell you, like, did he share that journey with you, or again, did you find out about everything later?
Yeah, no, we were very aware, and I think what had happened was that Jordan was in another relationship at that time. We could see quite a decline through the messages, and he was communicating with his mother a lot, and there were obviously concerns there. Jordan and I had a good relationship, but he was an adult. We didn't see each other every week. A few weeks could go by. Maybe every so often we'd have a beer together and do things like that. But he did chat with his mum quite a lot. And for some context as well, which a lot of people listening may find quite surprising, his mother is a mental health nurse and a senior mental health nurse. We've talked about this, and I think she could see signs that were concerning her because she lived further away. She would often ask me to check in with Jordan, see how he's doing, how does he seem to you? And of course, I had no knowledge of mental health at that time, or suicide, or that there would be a risk or anything of that nature. So I do what most people who are not educated about this world do. I'd phone Jordan up or message him and ask him how he's doing. And he would tell me he was fine. And I would report back to his mother that he was fine. I know differently Now, I know very differently, but at that time, that was what I thought was the right thing to do. Or we'd go for a beer. And I knew Jordan was struggling, but in my head, I thought, okay, we're going for a beer or a pizza, or we're going to a concert. I've got two things I could do here. I could start opening up and asking him about his mental health when we're going for a beer. That'll be an interesting night, given we haven't seen each other for a few weeks. Or I could just be dad, and we could go out and have a beer. And we could talk about the football and do other things, and that's what I tended to do. But I always ask him how he was, and if he told me he was fine, maybe work was a bit shit or something like that. But that was it. But it got to a point where clearly Jordan was really struggling, and I can't remember whether he invited me or whether I said I was coming over. But I came over to the place where him and his girlfriend were staying, and I picked Jordan up and brought him back to his house with his stepmom and I. So this is back in 2015. And I remember this lad just walking out of the house with a bag, got in the car, barely spoke a word, looked like he'd lost weight, just looked like there was nothing there. And, I think that was the moment we kind of really realized that something serious was going on. And that was the moment that he agreed to go and seek professional help and see the GP, and then had really what we understand was the one and only period of counselling, where he went through a period of about 16 weeks of cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT, at that time.
Wow. And you were saying this about how you're from the respect of Jordan's mom being like, hey, can you check in on him? And then you do it and you're like, oh, I'm fine. And how did it feel? I guess, like, did you started to then say, as when he went to when he started, basically when he saw started seeing a GP, is that when you, like, when did you start to basically, I guess, do some research or like educate yourself more on the respects of like what to look for and things like, or like how did that come across?
I'll be really honest, I didn't. And I look back and I asked myself, why during that period did I not educate myself? And it's not a justification, but to explain, I suppose. So I had a busy consultancy life. I'd travel all over the country, so I was busy. Jordan, for several weeks, stayed at our house. His stepmother was great. She would chat with him most days and have some really great, what we'd almost consider counselling conversations, but she's not a counsellor. She did a huge amount to help restore Jordan and bring him back to where he could go and function in life again. He was on medication, antidepressants, prescribed by the GP, of course, at that time, and he was going for therapy. And my knowledge of mental health was zero. So I thought, well, okay, he's being looked after. He seems to be gradually getting better. He's going to work. It didn't, and this might be startling to people listening, it didn't even cross my mind that I needed to go and get educated about this subject. And I shake my head now and think, well, why, Steve? Why didn't it just dawn on you that you should have learned more about what this meant? And I think if I had been aware that there was even the slightest risk that what Jordan was experiencing could lead to suicide, I think that would have changed completely. But that never even crossed my mind.
It's so hard to, though, because I think I was gonna say that now I got to the point where, because I'm very, I got to the point where I got to the point. But yeah, in the last couple of years, I'm very open with this, and especially with my partner, because of us like living together and everything like that. So I remember when we started, well, like when I opened up to her a while back. She started like from time to time, be on her reading list. There will be a book, either about like again mental like well-being, or there would be a book about I think even like people like with BPD, or we would watch something related to something like that. But and I still I get to the point. What I was going to say is that I sometimes I used to feel like really shocked when I was like, oh, why would you do this? Because it's kind of, it feels so. To go back to what you were saying, I get it, because I think especially when you know that the said person, because you I think there is so again, it's such a new new in a respect, is like such a new thing to look at, or like mental health is like such a new, I guess, concept that people are still trying to figure out, and see how what works best and how it works. It kind of feels almost like anything where, oh, if you got a cold, you see the doctor, you get the medication, and you look out, you drink tea, and or like you eat like a good meal, or whatever the doctor says. Basically, that's that. You don't really need to. Um, yeah, to do all these things around. But I was going to ask you now a little bit about, like, I guess I guess a little bit about like your own journey now, and your own story, and your own dealing with everything that's happened. Because again, just for context, sadly I've lost my parents, but I think I can imagine, the going through the loss of a son. It's I can only think that it's so much worse, because I guess to me it was sad, but it was the case of, at least to me, I feel like one of the things that made me go through it was that it's just the way things work. I can't, I don't know, but there is a saying in Romania that
Kind of the natural. They
yeah,
call it the natural order of things,
it's
don't
yeah, a
they?
child
Yeah,
has to
yeah.
bury his parents, sort of thing, not the other way
Mm.
around. And then yeah, so now we're going to Steve in the car, away on a work trip, or away from home, and then you get that phone call. And
Yeah, I mean it. This whole journey is, 1 hour, 4.5, nearly, coming up to 5 years this December. But I remember the phone call. As I say, I remember the phone call is logged at 2 minutes. I know that because I wrote about that subsequently and checked. But I think I remember about 20 seconds of the call. That was it. But yeah, I remember, you sit there in the car and you think, well, what do I do now? I'm 3.5 hours away from home. And I remember after a period of time going back into the building I'd just come out of, and see the smiling receptionist there who I'd left about half an hour earlier by this time, looking a little puzzled why I'd maybe come back into the building. But I think she instantly took one look at my face and knew something was yeah, pretty tragically wrong. And they were brilliant. They kind of looked after me. Um, I said, look, I need to drive home. They said, well, look, we'll send a driver with you. You can get the train back or whatever. And I remember thinking, you kind of get into a very practical mode, or I did at that time, thinking, I can't have some poor sod sitting next to me who's going to have to listen to the phone calls I'm going to have to make, and me probably bawling my eyes out on the way. I couldn't put anyone through that. So I drove back and I made all those calls, and it was rush hour around Birmingham and busy, and it just took forever. And then I say you come back to the house. But if we kind of shorten that down now and think that I recognised the responsibility on my part, that someone had to kind of take control of the situation, and from the immediacy of all that was going on to subsequently dealing with Jordan's affairs and putting his house on the market. And his stepmom, bless her heart, did an incredible job in redecorating the whole house over the following months, and I would find that very difficult. She was often there for hours on her own in the house, and of course a place where her stepson had taken his own life. There were parts of the house she found very difficult to go to, near the stairs, and I experienced trauma. I was never formally diagnosed, but I kind of recognised the symptoms as probably being post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. That would manifest itself in violent head twitches. I could just be watching television, something in the head would violently twitch. Two times where I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. It would literally knock the wind out of me if I was standing by the kitchen sink washing up and be knocked backwards. I mean, there's nothing to do that, but that's what I had. And the panic attacks in bed. And it was really interesting, actually. I didn't discuss this with my wife last night, but I was watching a TV drama, and one of the characters was having a panic attack, and his wife was calming him and getting him to count. And it just brought it all back, and I could feel within my body, and I kind of did the typical man thing, didn't show anything, but that took me right back to that place. So there was trauma that I experienced for several months, but as part of that journey, I did start to read. I did start to connect with more people who'd experienced suicide. And a lot of that came from the fact that only 3 weeks after Jordan's death, I published an article on LinkedIn. The article was titled "The Day My Son Took His Own Life." And it was partially about letting off some steam. It was partially about going, am I the only person going through this? I didn't know anyone else that had experienced suicide. So am I the only person? And I would share all that was going on with the police and the coroner and forgive my language, the shit show that was happening. But I also wrote it in the hope that someone reading it who is feeling suicidal might read it and go, wow, is this what I'm going to leave behind? I can't do that to my family. I can't do that to my friends. And that did work, because what I hadn't anticipated from a LinkedIn article was just quite the reaction it would get. Well over 1 million views. People like Ariana Huffington from the HuffPost in America emailing me. It became huge. And I think that's really, Levi, what started my journey to where we are now. But I was consuming books. I was watching videos. I was talking to people then as a result. As the more I shared my story, the more the following grew. And that has continued, I think, to help me even today, because I talk so much about the story. And I can feel it today, even speaking. There are moments where I think, just hold it together. And there are talks that I deliver. I deliver many talks around the country and overseas, and there will always be a moment in that talk where you relive a part of that story where I just choke. And I think that is important as well, because I think the day that doesn't happen is the day I kind of have to stop what I'm doing, because I've become so disassociated with it all. But I think the work has helped. I think it has definitely helped me cope with my grief much better. I'm always conscious that there might be a day where suddenly I collapse in a heap, but increasingly I'm thinking that day is less likely to come as long as I continue to do what I'm doing. It's kind of my therapy, I suppose, really.
And you were saying, and I think you've covered it really well, because I to be honest, while we were chatting, at times I was like, oh, I think I felt getting very emotional, just because in so many ways the story, to an extent, it's so there are parts that are relatable to everyone. Whether again you're impacted by this, and I think that it's a beautiful sort of phrasing that you used, which I'll probably start taking it as well. The one about people, was it people affected, or people having experienced suicide? Because I think, to me, actually, before actually this call, it was kind of like, the person experiencing suicide is a person who has committed the said suicide. Well, now it's kind of, I think I'm still having this, like, going through this realization in my head that I've got from you about how, actually, anyone around it is, to an extent,
It's a really important point, and I think what might surprise a lot of people listening is, and again, things that I've learned on this journey is that for every suicide death, that will impact on average 135 other people. And I remember hearing that statistic for the first time and thinking, 135? Well, we've gone way past 135. I know that. But if you think of everyone from the first responders to, I can think back to the funeral director, that the meetings we had with her, she would cry more than we did at times. So affected was she by the story and Jordan's death. You've got colleagues, work colleagues, you've got friends, extended networks, you've got the people that I had to go and speak to deal with Jordan's electricity bill or his gas bill, or who might have been the same age as Jordan, some of these people I spoke to. And when you look at that number and think, well, we lose more than 6,000 people to suicide every year in the UK. If each death impacts 135 people, that's over 800,000 people every year that are impacted by suicide. And those bereaved by suicide are actually at a 63% increased risk of attempting to take their own lives as a result. So this ripple effect that we talk about is massive. And this is why more has to be done to raise awareness, but importantly, support and intervene with those who are contemplating suicide, but also have this postvention support, as we call it, for those who have been impacted by suicide as well. It's really important part of the whole mix, really.
For sure, because I was thinking now as we were discussing about uh, for context. I've struggled. I think since I was 13. That was the first time when I've planned, or like I went through ways in my head of like ending my own life, and then but I've never addressed it, or like I've never actually talked about it until sometime maybe just before I got diagnosed with BPD. So maybe like almost 2 years ago, over 2 years ago now. And the way it happened is because a friend of a friend has committed suicide. And then I remember my friend telling me about it and him being like, "Oh, I don't understand why he would have done that. He was, a very good, like a good musician. He was having like all these amazing things going on for him." And I genuinely at the time in my head, I was like, "No, I get it." I was so close to like just being like, yeah, like it doesn't matter how good things are. Just in my head, although again my friend was like he just couldn't understand why. I was like, yeah, I can see why. And that was, I think, one of the moments to me where I started questioning my own existence even more. So I guess, yeah, the thing that you were saying about the number of the people that get impacted, and you see it's someone that I've never met. He was someone that I never met, but then I was like, oh. And again, I think on going back to the way I found out about Jordan's and about your story because of the porridge spoon. It was the same thing. When I've seen it, it's not necessarily about what I've seen, it's about the emotions that I felt reading that post, where I was just so, again, like it was so relatable to an extent where like it was just mind blowing, and to come back to come back here now is just fascinating. I think everything is just so, and like you said, it has to be talked, because I've never saw it like you address it now, where you're like, there's 6,000 suicides, but then those impact this many people who are themselves either at risk of, or again, just I feel like having to live with, I think having to live with grievance is one thing, but then I can only imagine grieving the death of someone who's committed suicide, how much more painful, or how that can be, or how that feels.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I can relate to a comment you mentioned earlier about losing your parents as well. And quite often people would message to say, I've lost my father or mother to suicide, or in a traumatic event, or just lost my parents. It must be so much worse, losing a child. And I think my response to that is always to say, grief is a very personal thing. I don't think there's a hierarchy. I don't think one death is. Well, I think in society we create that, and for the reasons that you mentioned, that no parents should have to bury their child. It's something we hear a lot, and I suppose we've become conditioned to believe that. But each death is very personal. Each loss is very personal, and someone might be more traumatized or feel more strongly the death of a parent than someone might their own child. So I think it's very, very, very personal. I think that's the important thing to recognise. But a death by suicide is different, I think. Whoever the person is that you've lost, I once heard it being described of it's a little bit like there's a hand grenade has gone off in your front room, and you might survive the initial blast, but all the fragments from that grenade stay with you embedded in you for the rest of your life. And I think and those fragments are probably very often the questions. Why, when that person had everything going for them, a successful music career and all this, why? What did I miss? What did I not do right? So these are the fragments, really. They're all the questions that we ask.
Wow. You were saying about the grievance being very personal. And I very much agree with that because I feel, and again, I think this is a question for you and for you, like how you basically grieve in your own way. Because obviously, we did mention that the work that you do around the Jordan's legacy, it's helping you out a lot. But I think just to like talk about like grievance in again is the fact that I found very interesting that loads of people see it as like, oh, it's like one of those things where, oh, you get 2 weeks from work if like close relative is dying, then those are your 2 weeks to grieve, and then once that's like time's up, and you get on. And I feel like that's kind of to me happened when my dad died, where I was like, oh, I got 2 weeks to basically deal with it, and then I'm back at like living a normal life, and then 5 years later I actually like I've allowed for everything to accumulate, and 5 years later I almost crushed under all that pain. So now when I basically like, yeah, that was it, where like how do you, I guess, yeah, like how do you speak with other people even in like more details, or how do you I guess not necessarily advice, because like I said it's very personal, but yeah, how do you see grief and this idea of like having a time limit?
Yeah, that's a really important point you've raised there, because we do, particularly in the workplace. Look, most of us will spend most of our time at work more so than at home than anywhere else. But when you talk about it in the way you've just talked, Levi, to say you've got 2 weeks for your grief, basically. Really, and some companies will be very proud of that, by the way, because some other companies won't do that at all. So I better get all my grief in 2 weeks. What a ridiculous thing, isn't it? There should be no period at all. It should be, you've lost someone, we will provide ongoing support. We'll take some time off, whatever you need, but we'll provide ongoing support for as long as you need that support from us. So that's how it should be. So it shouldn't be a statutory period of time. That's just ludicrous. But in terms of talking with other people about their own grief, and people do reach out. I'm not a counsellor. I'm not a mental health professional at all. I often have to say, to remind people, I'm a grieving dad myself, because sometimes it can be quite overwhelming, the responses that I get. But the one thing I often say to people is that one of the ways that has worked for me, and I know has worked for others, is trying to find some sense of purpose within that grief. Because if you let it consume you, it will bring you down like a pile of bricks crumbling down. And that sense of purpose for some people might be, I'm going to get up today and get dressed. That is a big step forward. How many of those can you accumulate over the next few weeks? For other people, and not for everybody, it might be, Steve, I want to do what you're doing. I want to set up a charitable organization or a CIC or whatever, and I want to get out there and I want to make a difference. and that's fine if that's right for you. But I think my message always is, try and find some sense of purpose that gives you a meaning to get up and get out of bed and move forward. You will never move on, and I think I've heard that phrase used sometimes. When do you move on? Well, you don't move on. You never move on, but you can move forward. And I've met many amazing people who've been able to do that through huge loss and trauma in their lives. And we hear the stories on the news and all sorts for different situations. But find that sense of purpose, and I think that's what keeps us. I think there's a very famous book by an author called Viktor Frankl, some years old now, of his time in the concentration camps in the war. Man's
Search for Meaning.
Search for meaning of life. Yeah, I never get that title quite right. Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah, an incredible book.
Yes,
and that is it. What is the meaning for me now in life? And I think if you can find that, I really recommend reading that book. It's been a long time since I've read it, but that will help you take those steps forward.
I remember during COVID. Like when the first lockdown happened, we were, So the first, because the lockdown started in March, and then on that, was it 2020? Yeah. So in 2020, in the last day of the year, we had a work meeting, and I had basically I talked about, because I love that book. I also haven't read it in a while, but I absolutely love the book. And I remember, when people were like, "Oh, we go into 2021, everything will just," as if, like, lockdown will just stop on January 1st. Like, there will be no more restrictions. Everything is back. And I was like, no. I read this thing, and I believe in, like, what Viktor Frankl said about how basically, like, the Jewish people in, like, the concentration camp that had, like, a date in mind where they're going to be released. They were the first one they were the first ones to die, because once that day came and they lost the hope, they kind of, again, they lost their, the sense of, or like the reason of leaving. And I gotta tell you, I think it was like well, it was one of the most depressing meetings we had, because I came with this analogy and everyone was like, okay, well, that's the last meeting. It was like, kind of like, this is the last meeting of the year. And I remember my manager just looking at me like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah. And then later on, I was like, oh, maybe I should have not.
Maybe there's a different way to have delivered that message.
Delivered that message. And I just remember the story now, where, like, my as soon as the meeting ended, my manager was like, "Hey, do you wanna talk about anything?"
Yeah, I hope you include that in your stand-up, by the way. So
I just thought of it now, so hopefully I will.
I look forward to seeing that.
I haven't thought about this for years, and now when we were talking about the book, I was like, "Oh my God, I remember!" Because I remember his face. He was just puzzled, and I could see, like, colleagues like, "Where is he going with this?" Like, what's? And basically, my only thing was, don't put, like, a time limit on hope, which I think in this situation is about, like, grief as well. Where, again, it's not, you can't just be like, okay, I'm gonna grieve, like, until this time today and then I'm done, because I do remember sometimes I'd listen to songs, or, like, to artists that my mom introduced me to, because my mom loved music, and that makes me cry. That gives me, a tear. Or sometimes I have this thing where, if I'm in the sea, I used to always call my mom when I would be, like, doing chores around the house, and I'd be with her on the phone. And now sometimes when I do chores, that's when I become emotional, because that's, it's almost a reminder of, oh, I can't call that person. So that's.
I think that's a great title, by the way. I was just writing down, "Don't put a time limit on hope." There might be a LinkedIn post coming out.
Yes, no,
soon.
please do. I think it's and again, I truly enjoy.
Really important.
I truly enjoy your writing. I enjoy your posts. So
Thank you.
now I was going to ask you, because obviously we talked about it at the beginning. It's a very busy period for you. Is there anything we gotta look out for? Anything that you want to? And also, where do people who listen to this? How do they stay in touch with you?
Yeah, well, I've thank you for bringing that up, Levi. Yeah, lots of talks booked around the country and online during September, where we have World Suicide Prevention Day on the 10th, and of course in October we have World Mental Health Day on the 10th of October. So that's another busy period. Aside from that, we're doing a lot of work and planning kind of the next phase of the Jordan legacy, and that is very much around collaboration. I think we've seen suicide numbers that have remained flatlined nationally for nearly 16 years now, with no measurable decrease at all, after a period of steady decline, actually, from the 1980s. We're just not making a dent in the numbers. And we really believe, and many share my vision, that if we were to collaborate in a much more effective way and share our knowledge and expertise nationally, so many good people doing great things, we could actually bring those numbers down. So fairly major project for us this year is to create a network and create what I'm calling, and just named with the help of Chat GTP, I should say, something we're calling One Voice, One Hope. So that'll be a big initiative coming out this year. Who knew Chat GTP would help me with that? But for people that want to find out about our mission, about our work, we also have lots of help and resources, a complete section that we've accumulated for various issues related to mental health and suicide, support for young people, older people. Visit the jordanlegacy.com website. You'll find all that information there and ways to kind of sign up for our monthly newsletter, which I try and get out monthly. Sometimes it's 6 weeks. It just depends how busy things get, because we're a tiny organization. I did have someone message me very recently saying we'd love to come and visit your foundation. I said, well, you can come and have a cup of tea in my kitchen, because we're really not that big. But no, thank you for allowing me to signpost that. But yeah, the jordanlegacy.com, that's the place to go.
Just to say it as well, because I did have a look in the preparation of this on the web. Very well put together website. It looks very pretty and it looks very beautiful, very appealing, and it was just really nice to go through
I've just lost you completely. I don't know if you can hear me still, but I've lost you completely. I'm going to try and change channels here.
Hello?
Oh, I think you may be back. You're back.
Yes. Sorry.
I got to the bit where you said, I've just had a look at your website.
Yeah, I had to look for the website. It looked great, and I was going to say that it looks it's very beautiful, and the content was very clear to see as well. Anyway, this is it's a live review that you didn't ask for, but I really enjoyed the website.
Thank you.
And also, one last thing before we wrap it up. I was just curious, how did you become were you always such a good writer, or do you have a background on that as well, or did you learn it because of your job? Like, how did you, because it was very good.
I mean, thank you. Really appreciate that. I think, as I say, my background in social media for 11 years probably helped. I don't know whether it's just an innate thing that I had within me, perhaps, that was waiting to come out, perhaps. But yeah, I've always enjoyed writing, and sharing stories, I think, are really, really important. So yeah, my time with social media honed those skills, I think. And I've often said that, and then many people I've spoken to can relate to this, that in many ways, my background in business, my background in leadership and management, in professional coaching and in social media, provided me with the skills that have now come in so useful for what I do now. And, I'm not a huge spiritualist or believer in fate necessarily, but maybe a few things have aligned that meant this was always where I was going to be, albeit through very tragic circumstances, of course. But thank you. No, really appreciate that.
Thank you for taking the time. It was such a pleasure to virtually meet you, and I hope we'll hear from you again. And good luck for the months to come. It sounds like it's very busy, but that's good. That's in a very positive way.
Thank you. Really appreciate the invitation, Levi.
Very welcome. Take care. Bye for now. How was it? Was it what you hoped for? I hope so because I definitely enjoyed doing it, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed listening to it, and I hope look, if you're struggling with any thoughts as such, you're not alone. Don't forget that. And then if you are impacted, or if you're basically someone who's struggling, just let them know you're there, and let them know there are ways to deal with this. Now, that's all from me for this week. Enjoy, and we'll see each other next week, or hear from each other next week. But until then, from me, Pickle and Sarma, stay skillful, and goodbye.